Hi. So we've looked at this lesson so far at solving equations, which means finding a number that we don't know that's been confused when the way it's been confused is by adding or subtracting. And we've looked at solving an equation, which means finding a number we don't know when it's been confused by multiplying it. And in both those cases, you just do the opposite. If they've added to the number, you subtract. If they've subtracted to the number, you add. If they've multiplied, you divide, because all those are opposite operations. Today we're going to look at a slightly more complicated thing, but you're going to do great with it, where they haven't done one thing to the number, they've done two. And it's not so bad. So let's take a look together, shall we? So here we go, we've got this lesson. And I thought I'd start by showing you how I make a question like this, which is maybe a weird approach. But I want you to imagine that we have a number, and I've picked my number, and the number I want you to finally come up with at the end is x equals 5. That's the number I want you to know. And you'll find that this is already written on the note, but I'm just going to talk you through it like this. So we have our number, x equals 5, and I want to confuse it. And I'm going to confuse it in two ways. First, I'm going to multiply it by something. And secondly, I'm either going to add or subtract. In this case, I'm going to keep it easy, and I'm going to add to it. So this is my plan. I'm going to confuse this number in two ways. So the first thing I want to do is I want to confuse it by multiplying. And so what I might say is, okay, let's multiply this side by 3. And what I'm really saying is I'm going to confuse my number by making it 3 times bigger. I'm going to multiply it by 3. And because it's an equation, to show that, we have to multiply both sides by 3. And now, instead of telling you my number is 5, which would be easy, I'm going to tell you that 3 times my number is something. And if you can't do 3 by 5 in your head, no worries, get a calculator. But probably you can. Probably you know 3 by 5 is 15. But if you can't, that's fine. And there we go. I've now confused my number. Instead of saying x is 5, I've said 3 x's is 15. Instead of saying my number is 5, I've said 3 times my number is 15. But now we're going to do a second step. We're going to do a second thing to try to confuse it. And in this case, we're going to add. And I'm going to say, okay, now I'm going to add 2 to my number. And I'm just picking random things. It doesn't matter what you choose to do. I chose to add 2. And the result of that is that I can say, well, now 3 times my number and 2 more is equal to 17. And that's how we would make an equation. This at the end is the question I'm now going to give you. So if you look, the reason I've gone through this process is to show you that to make this question, I didn't confuse it once, I confused it twice. First I did some multiplying, then I did some adding. So when we go to solve this, we're going to have to undo not one thing, but we're going to have to undo 2 things. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go take a look. And by the way, this wording just shows that. I just wrote it out, where we say first we're going to multiply by 3, and multiply by 3. Then we're going to decide to add 2 and add 2. And that leaves us with that. So now, let's talk about what that looks like on the other side. How do we solve this? How do we unconfuse it? How do we unmake this question? And the answer is just one step at a time. You have 2 things to undo. First, we multiplied, then we added. And when we go to undo that, we're going to work backwards. So first, we're going to deal with that. Then we're going to deal with this. Always take care of your adding and subtracting first, then take care of your dividing, and you'll be fine. I'm not really going to explain why that is. We could talk about how it's order of operations backwards because you're solving, but really, this is saying I multiplied my number by 3, then I added 2. That's what this says right here. So we're just going to do the opposite. First, we're going to unadd 2, then we're going to unmultiply by 3. So let's get to it. The opposite of adding 2 is subtracting 2. That's going to make that go away. But what I do to one side of an equation, I've got to do to the other side of an equation. So I also have to subtract 2 here. And that means that over here now I'm going to have 15 minus 2. And over here, I got rid of my plus 2 by doing the opposite. So the only thing left is a 3x. And of course, we can then say, we know what 15 minus 2 is. If you don't know what 15 minus 2 is, use your calculator. As it happens, 15 minus 2 is 13. So there we go. And now, I'm ready to deal with this. And this is x has been multiplied by 3. And so the opposite of multiplying by 3 is going to be dividing by 3. And so we divide this side by 3. And those will take care of each other. Been using that as a rule to get rid of that. And so we will get with x equals, and because without meaning to I changed this question, we're going to end up with a decimal here, but that's okay. 13 divided by 3 is 4.3. Not the example I was looking for, but that's all right. I meant this to be the same question as last time. Whoops. And there we go. We've solved it. So we just undid what they did. So we can say here, the opposite of adding is subtracting. And we can say here, the opposite of multiplying is dividing. All right, hopefully that makes some kind of sense. Let's try another one. Here's another one. And pause the video and try and go through this if you want. Try it out on your own. But again, we're just going to deal with two things. And if we read this out loud, it says we've taken our number and first we multiplied it by 4, then we added 6. So to undo that, we're going to work backwards. Before we unmultiply it by 4, we're going to unadd 6. We're going to take away this piece of confusion. And so the opposite of adding 6 is subtracting 6. But if I subtract 6 from this side, I have to do the same to that side because it's an equation. And an equation only works if you do the same thing on both sides. That's going to take care of that because adding 6 and subtracting 6 undo each other. And we get 4x equals 18 minus 6. If you need a calculator to do 18 minus 6, there's nothing wrong with that. I happen to know that one. 18 minus 6 is 12. You could even do that on your fingers because you got more than 6 fingers. So now we know that we don't know our number, but we know 4 times our number is 12. We've dealt with this first layer of confusion, which is they added 6 to make it more confusing. Now, we're going to deal with this 4. The other thing they've done is they've multiplied our number by 4. The opposite of multiplying by 4 is dividing by 4. But what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So that's going to take care of that. And we'll end up with x being equal to 12 divided by 4. And then we need to do that on our calculator if we need, or you can do it in your head. I happen to know that if we take 12 and we divide it into 4 groups, each of those groups is going to have 3. So our unknown number in this case is 3. So if somebody says to you, I am thinking of a number, and 4 times my number, and 6 more is 18, you'll be like, yeah, it's 3. No big deal. But those are the steps we follow. And again, the reason we can do that is the opposite of adding is subtracting. And secondly, the opposite of multiplying is dividing. We're going to try just one more together, actually 2 more together, just to make sure we got it. So let's look here. here we have another number, and it's been confused in two ways. Now this time we're subtracting, but that doesn't stress us out because we know what the opposite of subtracting is. So we don't know our number, but we know 2 times our number minus 3 is 17. So they've done 2 things to confuse our number. They multiplied it by 2, and then they subtracted 3. We're going to undo those. And we always work backwards. Undoing is backwards. You got to take your shoes off before you can take your socks off. Right? So if we said, I took my foot and I put socks on it, then I put shoes on it, you have to take the shoes off before you can take the socks off. Right? In this case, we took our number, we multiplied it by 2, then we subtracted 3. You got to untake away 3 before you can unmultiply by 2. So we're going to deal with that take away 3 first. And the opposite of taking away 3 is adding 3. That's going to make that just go away because they're opposite operations. But for an equation, equal sign means whatever happens on one side has to happen on the other. So this will only be true if I add 3 there. And now we line our equal signs up because we're careful mathematicians. I'm going to give myself a bit more space here, sorry. And we can say, okay, with no negative 3 there anymore, 2x is equal to 17 plus 3. And if you need a calculator, use a calculator, but this one I can do in my head because 17, 18, 19, 20. So this is 20. Now I'm one step closer to being done. Taking the shoe off, now I got to take the sock off. First we dealt with the fact that they subtracted 3 to make our number confusing. Now we're going to deal with the fact that they also multiplied it by 2. And the opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. And what I do to one side of an equation, well, I have to do to the other. So those will take care of and cancel themselves because we're undoing that operation. That's the whole reason we're doing this. And we'll get x is equal to 20 divided by 2. And again, you can use your calculator, but I know that if I've got 20 bucks and there's 2 of us, we're each going to get 10 bucks. My number here has to be 10. And there we go. Not so bad. The last thing I'd mention is that sometimes you're going to deal with decimals, and we shouldn't let that stress us out either. So here's one more question. Let's do this one. I know I said the last one was one more, but I lied. But here we have a question that involves numbers with decimal places. And if we think maybe that should induce panic in us, it shouldn't. It's the exact same process. We have some number, and first they multiplied it by 2.4. And then they added 4.1. They did 2 things to confuse it. And they used decimals, boo, even more confusing, but that's fine. They still just did 2 things to confuse it. And again, you got to take off your shoes before you can take your socks. First they multiplied, then they added. For us to undo what they did, we got to undo the adding, then we undo the multiplying. So I'm not going to worry about that 2.4 yet. We're going to deal with plus 4.1. And the opposite of adding 4.1 is subtracting 4.1. And what we do on one side, we got to do the other. And so we'll just take that. These operations cancel each other out. That's why we did them. They're the opposite of each other. And so we'll put our equal sign here, and we can say 2.4x is equal to 15.3 minus 4.1, whatever that is. Now, for this, you very well may need a calculator. So let's do that. 15.3 minus 4.1, and we should get 11.2. Nice. So we can get 2.4x being equal to 11.2. My advice, use a calculator. You don't need to be able to do this in your head. Now we're one step closer, but now we can deal with the fact that the other way they've confused this is by multiplying by 2.4. I mean, the opposite of multiplying by 2.4 is dividing by 2.4. And if we divide that side, we got to divide this side. You got to treat both sides fairly, equally. So those will cancel, and we will end up with x being equal to, well, I don't know about you, but I don't know my 2.4 times table, so I'm going to have to use a calculator for that for sure. So we'll say 11.2 divided by 2.4. just off the face of it, this should be like, I don't know, 4.3 maybe? Something like that. Let's see. 4.6. There we go. So we get 4.6667. So that's 4 2/3, 4.7. However you want to write it, you can round it. That's okay. But there is our answer. So when there's a decimal place, that doesn't need to stress us out either. We know how to deal with that. So that's it. Hopefully you found that kind of helpful. And yeah, this kid's rolling into class now. So I've obviously left recording this video to the last minute, but that's okay.